The man who invented guitar smashing didn't do it for the cameras. He did it because his own father convinced him he wasn't worthy of a real instrument. But that childhood betrayal was just the beginning of Pete Townshend's lifelong war against himself, a war that would lead to deliberate hearing damage, a devastating scandal, and one of the darkest secrets in rock history. Most people think they know The Who's story, the wild concerts, the explosive performances, the legendary guitar destruction that became rock and roll's most iconic ritual. What they don't know is that every shattered guitar represented something far more disturbing than teenage rebellion. Each act of destruction was Pete Townshend's way of destroying a piece of himself over and over again, until he nearly lost everything. The roots of this self-destruction trace back to a moment that would haunt Townshend for decades. Growing up in 1950s England, young Pete desperately wanted to follow in his father's musical footsteps. His dad was a brilliant musician with the Royal Air Force Dance Band, someone who understood the power of a quality instrument. But when Pete showed interest in guitar, his father made a choice that would echo through rock history in the most twisted way imaginable. Instead of supporting his son's musical dreams, Townshend's father allowed the boy's grandmother to buy him what Pete would later describe as the kind of guitar you hang on the wall of an Italian restaurant. A cheap Italian restaurant. The message was brutal. Pete wasn't worthy of a decent instrument. He wasn't worth the investment. When Pete complained, his father's response was even more crushing. "When you can get a tune out of this, I'll buy you a good one." Years later, Townshend would connect this rejection directly to his famous destruction, admitting the guitar had become a symbol of his father's lack of faith in him. The first act of musical violence came when Pete was just 13. He was rehearsing with future Who bassist John Entwistle when his grandmother stormed in, shouting, "Turn that bloody racket down!" Instead of complying, Pete grabbed the better guitar he'd actually saved up money from a paper route to buy and smashed it to pieces right in front of her. The words that followed revealed the rage that had been building. "Now will you fucking get out of my life?" he screamed as she stomped out. Entwistle's response was perfectly deadpan. "Another paper route, I think." But something deeper had happened in that moment. Townshend described it as triggering the same little bit of psychotherapy. The guitar destruction had become a way to channel hidden rage that he couldn't express any other way. Once he'd crossed that line, it was always there as a possibility, waiting to be unleashed whenever he needed to deal with any kind of hidden anger. When The Who formed and started playing live, that destructive impulse found its perfect stage. The first accidental smash happened at a tiny club they played every Tuesday when Pete's guitar hit the low ceiling and broke. He expected the audience to react with shock. After all, guitars were precious, expensive tools for musicians. But nobody seemed to care, and that indifference made him furious. So he finished the job, smashing what was left of the instrument to smithereens. Roger Daltrey would later reveal the truth that most people completely missed about these performances. Everyone focused on the visual spectacle, but that wasn't the point at all. According to Daltrey, Pete's guitar destruction was actually about the sound it made, specifically the sound of an instrument dying. These weren't quick, dramatic smashes for the cameras. They were extended, agonizing processes that could take 10 minutes or more. Daltrey described it as watching a sacrificial lamb being slowly destroyed. The guitar would scream as Pete tortured it, creating what he called an incredible sonic experience that left the band's ears bleeding. The volume was so extreme that sometimes the ringing in their ears wouldn't stop for 2 days after a show. This wasn't showmanship, it was musical torture, performed by a man who was systematically destroying his own ability to hear the thing he loved most. The hearing damage wasn't an accident or an unfortunate side effect of rock stardom. Pete Townshend deliberately exposed himself to dangerous sound levels because he was obsessed with pushing boundaries through volume. The Who became officially recognized as one of the loudest bands in history, with their 1976 concert at Charlton Athletic Football Club measuring 126 decibels at 32 meters from the stage, earning them a spot in the Guinness Book of Records as the loudest concert ever.
To put that in perspective, prolonged exposure to sounds over 85 decibels can cause permanent hearing damage. A clap of thunder directly overhead registers around 120 decibels. The Who were regularly performing at levels that could damage hearing in minutes, not hours. Townshend didn't just accept this risk, he embraced it, standing directly next to massive amplifier stacks night after night, systematically destroying his own ears as methodically as he destroyed his guitars. The irony was devastating. Pete blamed most of his hearing loss not on the concerts, but on using studio headphones at extreme volumes while recording. He was literally deafening himself in pursuit of the perfect sound, creating some of rock's greatest masterpieces while systematically eliminating his ability to hear them properly. By the 2000s, both Townshend and Daughtry were severely hearing impaired, with Daughtry eventually relying on lip reading and in-ear monitors just to perform. But the most shocking chapter of Townshend's story came in 2003, when his past traumas collided with his present in the most public and humiliating way possible. On January 13th, police arrived at his home as part of Operation Ore, a massive international crackdown on internet illegal material involving minors. Townshend was arrested under the Protection of Children Act, suspected of accessing and possessing inappropriate images. The accusations were devastating. This was Pete Townshend, the man who'd written Tommy, who'd supported children's charities for decades, who'd helped define rock music for multiple generations. Suddenly, he was facing charges that could destroy everything he'd built. The investigation dragged on for 4 agonizing months, while his reputation hung in the balance and tabloid headlines painted him as a predator. Townshend's explanation revealed another layer of his complicated relationship with trauma and investigation. He claimed he'd accessed a website in 1999 as part of research for his autobiography, where he planned to discuss his own suspected childhood abuse between the ages of 5 and 6. The guitarist believed he'd been molested as a child, and themes of abuse had haunted his creative work, particularly in Tommy, where the title character is assaulted by an uncle. According to Townshend, he stumbled upon a Russian website that showed him something so disturbing, an image of an infant being assaulted, that he wanted to call police immediately. But a lawyer advised him to do nothing, warning that downloading the image's evidence could actually incriminate him. So, he did nothing, a decision that would come back to haunt him when his credit card information was traced through the investigation years later. The police ultimately found no inappropriate images on any of Townshend's computers, but the damage was done. He was formally cautioned and placed on the National Sex Offender Registry for 5 years, forced to notify police of any travel plans or address changes. His DNA was taken and stored for future investigations. The man who'd spent decades supporting children's causes was officially classified as a potential threat to children. The psychological toll was enormous. Townshend later wrote that if he'd had access to a gun during this period, he would have used it on himself. He described the experience of feeling like a lynching, with his reputation and mental health hanging by a thread. But in a bizarre twist that perfectly captures his complicated relationship with destruction and renewal, Townshend later claimed the arrest probably saved his life, because the stress led to medical examinations that discovered his cancer early enough for successful treatment. The scandal essentially ended Townshend's public persona as rock's angry young man. He became more selective at performances, more protective of his privacy, more focused on preserving his legacy than creating new controversies. The man who'd built his career on destruction finally understood its true cost, not just to guitars or hearing, but to relationships, reputation, and the possibility of peace. Looking back at Pete Townshend's story, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Here was a man whose father's rejection led to a lifetime of self-destruction disguised as artistic expression. Every smashed guitar was an attempt to destroy the symbol of that childhood wound. Every deafening concert was another step toward pushing boundaries through sound. Even his investigation into abuse seems connected to his need to understand and somehow master the darkness that had shaped him. The tragedy isn't that Pete Townshend destroyed so many guitars or damaged his hearing or faced public scandal. The tragedy is that one of rock's most innovative artists spent his entire career trying to destroy the pain his father had planted in him. Never quite succeeding, but never quite giving up either. His music became beautiful precisely because it emerged from such profound personal destruction, making him perhaps the most literal example of the tortured artist in rock history. Pete Townshend didn't just play music, he weaponized it against himself. And while that self-destruction created some of the most powerful rock songs ever written, it also reveals how childhood wounds can echo through decades, shaping not just personal choices, but entire cultural movements. The man who taught the world that destruction could be art never quite learned how to stop destroying himself.